What you are about to read is not just a story, but a reflection of the lives of millions of people in the United States. People like Michael, a 48-year-old engineer from Seattle, whose life collapsed under the weight of a divorce and unexpected medical bills. Financial stress became a shadow that followed him, turning peaceful nights into battles against insomnia and worry. High blood pressure, a diagnosis he never expected, became the physical manifestation of his anxiety. Michael's journey is a cruel reminder. Financial health and physical and mental health are deeply intertwined. This is a warning, an opening to what happens when the wallet empties and health deteriorates. An invitation to understand how millions are on the verge of collapse and what can be done to turn the game around. Michael's routine, a 48-year-old engineer in Seattle, began to fall apart little by little, almost imperceptibly. The financial crisis didn't come all at once. It was a gradual process, an accumulation of small cracks that, over time, created an abyss. The divorce, which had already been a devastating emotional blow, left him with a series of unexpected financial responsibilities. Alimony, legal costs, and the need to move to a smaller apartment strained his budget. Soon after came the news that his ex-wife needed emergency surgery, and despite insurance, the medical expenses exceeded what he could afford. The result was a mountain of debt, with credit cards maxed out and loans being paid late. Michael, who had always seen himself as a responsible man with his life under control, was now in a scenario of chaos. Financial stress became a shadow that followed him everywhere. He felt constant anxiety, a knot in his stomach that tightened with every email notification about a bill. Nights, once a refuge, turned into battles against insomnia, where he would lie awake for hours, replaying numbers in his head, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. The worry manifested itself physically. He felt his heart race, his chest tighten, and headaches became a daily companion. During a routine checkup, his doctor confirmed what he already suspected. His blood pressure was dangerously high. The diagnosis was clear. Michael's physical and mental health was in decline, a direct reflection of his precarious financial situation. For Michael, the first crucial step was to recognize that he was in a red alert situation. He, like many Americans, grew up in an environment where talking about money was taboo. Shame and fear prevented him from seeking help. But the urgency of his health forced him to act. He started monitoring every penny that came in and out of his bank account. He wrote everything down: the cost of rent, the electricity bill, credit card payments, even the coffee he drank on his way to work. By analyzing the data, he noticed an alarming pattern. His spending exceeded his income by almost 30%. He was, without realizing it, using credit to finance his lifestyle. With the help of a friend who understood finance, he drew up a strict budget based on the 50-30-20th rule. 50% of his income for essential needs, rent, bills, food, 30% for wants, leisure, hobbies, and 20% for paying off debt and savings. Michael discovered that almost 70% of his income was committed to debt and basic expenses, leaving very little for anything else. He had to make drastic cuts. He canceled streaming subscriptions, reduced dining out, and started cooking more at home. The change was difficult, but brought a sense of control that he had long lost. Michael's story is a cruel and necessary reminder that bankruptcy is not just a sudden event, but a gradual process. It is a warning for others to seek help and monitor their finances closely before it's too late. Michael's lesson was clear. Financial recovery begins with awareness. By admitting his problem and facing the numbers head-on, he took the first step to regain control of his life. He began to cut superfluous spending, renegotiate debts, and seek therapy to deal with anxiety, signaling that the light at the end of the tunnel still existed. Sarah's life, a 52-year-old nurse in Chicago, was a constant race against time and debt. She worked double shifts, sacrificing her free time and health to try to balance the books. What consumed her, however, was not just work, but the overwhelming weight of debt. Student loan debt, the house mortgage, and supporting her 2 children were added to an unexpected loan to cover an emergency dental treatment. Each month, she felt more drowned in bills and with a sense of hopelessness that exhausted her. The stress was overwhelming, and Sarah felt constantly on the verge of a breakdown. Sarah's body, which she had always taken care of, began to show signs that something was wrong. She felt palpitations in her chest and a suffocating feeling that terrified her. The fear that something serious might happen led her to seek a cardiologist. The diagnosis of cardiac arrhythmia was directly linked to chronic stress, a condition increasingly common among Americans burdened by debt. The experts point out that medical debt and consumer debt are the main causes of bankruptcy in the U.S. Data from the American Medical Association shows that medical expenses are the leading cause of personal bankruptcy, affecting 66.5% of all cases. The lack of financial literacy worsens the problem, leading to a cycle of debt that is almost impossible to escape. Sarah's situation was not an isolated case, but a reflection of a systemic problem. She, like many others, made financial decisions based on emergencies and impulse, without long-term planning. She used credit cards to cover medical expenses, accumulating high interest, and did not have an emergency fund to protect herself from unforeseen events. What happened to Sarah was an accumulation of all these factors: a student loan debt that seemed to never end, a mortgage that held her captive, and a lack of knowledge about how to manage finances in times of crisis. She felt guilty and frustrated, but experts point out that bankruptcy is not a moral failure, but the result of a complex system and a lack of access to financial education. For Sarah, the way out was to seek the help of a financial consultant. She learned to prioritize her debts, negotiate interest rates, and create an emergency fund, no matter how small. Sarah's story shows that the path to recovery begins with admitting the problem and seeking professional guidance. Her stress began to decrease as she regained control of her financial life. The arrhythmia also improved, and she was able to dedicate herself to her children and her work with more peace of mind. Sarah's lesson is that, to get out of a hole, you need to understand the cause of the problem and seek practical solutions instead of drowning in despair. David's story, a 45-year-old architect in Los Angeles, is a tale of loss and recovery. He lost his job during the 2008 crisis, and the house where he lived with his wife and children was foreclosed. Without an emergency fund, he and his family were helpless. The financial uncertainty led him to episodes of anxiety and depression. He felt like a failure, unable to provide for his family. He began to drink and isolate himself from his friends and family, which only worsened the situation. His wife, Emily, convinced him to seek help. She found a support group for people going through financial difficulties. The first step for David was to accept help. He attended therapy sessions and support groups where he learned that bankruptcy was not the end, but a new beginning. He discovered that financial recovery requires courage to face the problem head-on. He began to actively look for a job, learn new skills, and reconnect with old colleagues. He and Emily made a strict budget, cutting unnecessary expenses and prioritizing the payment of their debts. They also learned about the debt snowball strategy, which consists of paying off the smallest debts first to create a sense of progress and motivation. David's story is a reminder that financial recovery is not just about numbers, but about resilience and mutual support. He and his wife came out of the crisis stronger and more united. He got a new job, and little by little, they began to rebuild their lives. David's lesson is clear. Bankruptcy can be overcome with an action plan, but the most important thing is to seek help and support. His recovery was not only financial, but also emotional. He became an advocate for financial literacy and the importance of having an emergency fund. David's story is proof that a crisis can be an opportunity to start over. Samantha, a 35-year-old woman in New York, always lived beyond her means. She had a good job as an advertiser, but she spent her entire salary on designer clothes, trips, and expensive dinners. She never worried about saving or investing, believing that life was meant to be lived to the fullest. However, her reality changed drastically when she was laid off. Without an emergency fund, she couldn't pay her rent and bills, and found herself forced to borrow money from friends and family. The stress and shame led her to a state of anxiety and depression. Samantha's story is an example of what a lack of financial literacy can cause. She never learned the difference between assets and liabilities, the importance of saving, and the risks of living with debt. What she learned the hard way was that consumerism can be a dangerous path to bankruptcy. After being laid off, she sought help from a financial consultant who taught her the basic principles of financial literacy. She learned about compound interest, the value of an emergency fund, and how to invest smartly. She dedicated herself to learning about finance and changing her consumer habits. Samantha started living on a budget, saving part of her salary and investing in low-risk funds. She got rid of her debts and began to build a more solid future. Samantha's story is a reminder that financial literacy is not just for experts, but for everyone. She understood that the power to control her finances was in her hands. Samantha's lesson is that financial literacy is the key to avoiding common mistakes and building a safer and more stable life. Her recovery was a process of self-discovery and a change in mindset, which led her to a more fulfilling and balanced life. Carlos's life, a 50-year-old teacher in Texas, was a constant financial juggling act. He loved his job, but the salary was not enough to cover all the family's expenses, especially after his wife had to undergo emergency surgery. The financial stress was affecting his health, causing insomnia and constant headaches. The worry about his children's future haunted him, and he felt that he was failing in his mission as a father. Carlos looked for a way out. He researched strategies for extra income and smart investments. He discovered that the internet offers several work opportunities, such as online classes, content creation, and consulting. He decided to use his knowledge of history to give private online classes, which earned him an extra income. He also learned about low-risk investments, such as index funds and government bonds, which helped him build wealth in the long term. Carlos's story is an example of how the search for financial alternatives can change a person's life. He not only managed to supplement his income, but also felt more confident and secure about the future. The financial stress decreased, and he started sleeping better and having more quality time with his family. Carlos's lesson is that creativity and the pursuit of knowledge are the keys to financial independence. His recovery was a process of learning and action, which led him to a more prosperous and balanced life. Mary's story, a 55-year-old lawyer in Miami, is an example of how financial stability can be fragile. She always had a good income and a good standard of living, but never worried about saving or investing for retirement. She believed she would continue working until she was 70, and that retirement was a distant thing. However, a heart attack forced her to stop working, and she found herself without income and without savings. The financial stress and worry about the future led her to a state of depression. Mary's story is a warning about the importance of long-term financial planning. She sought help from a financial consultant who taught her the importance of having an emergency fund, investing in a retirement plan, and diversifying her investments. She learned that financial security is a continuous process that requires discipline and planning. Mary's recovery was a process of learning and a change in mindset. She started investing a portion of her money in low-risk funds and looking for alternative sources of passive income. She also sought therapy to deal with depression and anxiety. Mary's story is a reminder that financial stability is not just about making money, but about knowing how to manage and protect it. Mary's lesson is that the financial future is built in the present. And the best way to ensure security is to start planning today.